Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman and thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, more monkeypox vaccines are set to flow to Black and Latino LGBTQ+ communities that are most at risk under a plan from the White House. We talk about what an equitable vaccine rollout looks like. As the Chicago trial of R. Kelly approaches closing arguments, a look at recent developments in the case. Meet a local mom whose search for fun, silly books for her own kids inspired her to write one.
I'm Angelito, and coming up tonight, I'll introduce you to a program that's training the next generation of pilots.
And Purple Rain, When Doves Cry, Raspberry Beret, Little Red Corvette. You know who we're talking about. We immerse ourselves in the late artist's life and legacy. First off tonight, the White House is announcing a program to distribute more monkeypox vaccines. The goal is to reach Black and Latino LGBTQ+ communities who are most at risk. According to CDC data from this month, Black people account for nearly 40% of monkeypox cases in the U.S., but received only about 10% of monkeypox vaccine doses. Joining us now with more are Dr. Anu Hazra, Assistant Professor of Medicine at UChicago Medicine and a physician at Howard Brown Health, and Jagadisha Deveshri Dakas, Research Assistant Professor and Associate Director for the Institute for Sexual and Gender Minority Health and Wellbeing at Northwestern University. Thanks to you both for joining us. Professor Dakas, let's start with you, please. Now, we just spoke about the national data. Where do you think Chicago stands in the vaccine rollout for monkeypox?
Oh, thank you for having me. In terms of the vaccine rollout here in Chicago, I mean, it really parallels what has been happening nationally. Where we have not seen what we characterize as an equitable distribution of the vaccine to the communities and populations that most need. And really what it represents is the ongoing challenges that we have in public health around making sure that the most marginalized and impacted receive, first and foremost, the benefits from these types of programs that are interventions.
Dr. Hazra, monkeypox disproportionately impacts men who have sex with men, and especially Black and Latino folks. But of course, we know this is not a gay disease necessarily. How does intersectionality, though, play into the role in addressing vaccine disparities?
I mean, it's the entire game here. I think the issue here is actually understanding the communities that are impacted the most. So thinking about Black and brown queer communities that are doubly marginalized in American society, and oftentimes even harder to reach with any biomedical interventions, including vaccinations. And so I think, the Biden administration and the CDC are really talking about putting investiture into community stakeholders, into trusted community members that are able to relay this type of message in the right way.
Professor Dakas, what do you think are some of the barriers that get in the way of a more equitable vaccine rollout?
Well, I mean, I think one of the first things that comes to mind is when we talk about stigma, especially intersectional stigma that members of the populations that are most at risk experience, based on racial identity, sexual orientation, and gender identities. And then there's also, as Dr. Hazard related to, is sort of access and the barriers to access too. I think that's why when we saw the initial rollouts nationally, and I think about the images that came out of New York City, where it was mostly white sexual minority men who were in line to receive the vaccines, and you saw very few, BIPOC or people of color individuals there. And understanding that white folks by and large in our country have more access to healthcare and experience fewer barriers in accessing healthcare, based on, thinking about people of color and their experiences with perceived, anticipated, and actual forms of discrimination and bias when they go and engage healthcare systems.
Dr. Hazra, how do we overcome some of those barriers to reach the marginalized communities, especially in Chicago?
I think there has to be targeted messaging that is really directed for the community and by the community. I think we need to bring vaccines to where the community is at. We can't expect folks to come all the way to, vaccine events in Boys Town or in East Lakeview when we're not able to actually provide vaccinations in the communities that we serve. I think, the blueprint has already been planned out with COVID vaccinations where we had, Protect Chicago Plus, which is really focusing on high vulnerability index zip codes and making sure that we had not only vaccination events, but also information events. It's one thing to have biomedical interventions, but if you don't have people who have trust in that, then you can have the best intervention in the world, but it's not going to get to the populations that need it. So having town halls, again, with community stakeholders that are able to really explain what's going on in the community, recognize who's at risk, and making sure those folks who are at risk feel empowered and taking care of their own health.
Professor Dacus, same question to you. What is the best way to reach marginalized communities?
Well, I just will really echo what Dr. Hazra said. I mean, it's really about engaging community partners and thinking about having community members, and especially those who have had positive experiences, be ambassadors and really, positively promote, the benefits of receiving these services. And it makes me think about, those individuals who want to receive vaccines and voluntarily go, and, having challenges around providing access. Those who have positive experiences really are the promoters who have said to their, who have spread the messages amongst their networks that, no, this is something that we can do to really, protect ourselves as individuals, but also to positively protect our communities.
Dr. Hazra, does vaccine hesitancy exist for the monkeypox vaccine the same way we saw it exist to some degree with the COVID-19 vaccine?
I think it definitely plays a role here. I think there's some key differences between the monkeypox vaccine and the COVID-19 vaccine, particularly around how long the vaccines has been around, which also plays into, the impact or the degree of hesitancy there is. I think, for the most part, we know in general in this country, queer people have had higher rates of vaccine uptake in the COVID vaccine than their non-queer counterparts. But when you actually separated that by race and ethnicity, we still saw the same types of divides we saw in the general population, particularly among Black and Brown queer Americans, still having ongoing needs for more education and more trust in these vaccines before they would uptake it. And I think the same story is occurring here. The messaging that we're giving, at least at Howard Brown at the University of Chicago, is really thinking about these are not new vaccines. These have been approved for several years now, well studied with plenty of safety data. So this is not something that's been just developed in the setting of this outbreak, like sort of what happened with the COVID vaccine. So overcoming that type of vaccine hesitancy, or the reason for that vaccine hesitancy, has been somewhat easier than with the COVID-19 vaccines.
Dr. Hazra, is there a danger in sort of trying to get the vaccine to the community that needs it most, but could that sort of make other communities think, oh, well, this isn't really my problem. I don't have to go get that vaccine?
Yeah, I think that's a really tough needle that a lot of us in public health and in medicine have been trying to thread. I think recognizing community at risk and recognizing that and stating that that's not stigmatizing in itself, that's factual. But it's when we sort of impart a moral framework on that fact is what starts to perpetuate stigma. And so recognizing who is at risk is important, because if we can recognize who is at risk, we can create targeted interventions and targeted messaging to make sure that, if you are a Black and Brown, man associated man or bisexual male, it's important for you to recognize your risk of monkeypox and how to protect yourself. At the same time, it's other folks or other institutions that place some sort of morality onto that fact, and then that's what ends up perpetuating stigma, which is wholly counterproductive into everything that we're trying to do. I think, in general, we recognize that monkeypox has been around for over half a century, and we know it can impact any community, any population, anywhere. This current outbreak is just concentrated in this specific population, but that does not mean that's, the hallmark of this infection. It's just what's going on with this current outbreak.
Professor Dacus, what are the lessons that we should have learned from COVID-19 in addressing case and vaccine disparities that we could also apply to the monkeypox vaccine?
Oh, very simply, I think about, the same populations that are most affected by COVID are the same populations that we're seeing most affected by monkeypox and have been most affected and impacted by other public health crises, HIV. We think about like health disparities. So it's really about elevating, and prioritizing those communities and populations most at risk when it comes to these public health crises. Particularly when we talk about like Black and Brown sexual minority men who, already face a myriad of other, psychological health related and mental emotional challenges around, their identities, intersectional identities. And so, I think that we've, as Dr. Hager said, we've got a blueprint. We know what to do. It's a matter of it's really enacting and really prioritizing this population and saying, hey, we've got the data. This makes sense. And we understand how, these diseases and infections really, really impact our larger populations and where they show up the most frequently. And so, really making that the priority, especially when it comes to, prioritizing the implementation of interventions and thinking about policy that really supports that. It provides resources to do this and to really support our community partners that have stepped up to, make a difference and an impact.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to you both for joining us, Dr. Anu Hazra and Professor Jagadish Devashri-Dekas. Thanks for joining us.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Jury deliberations in the Chicago trial against R. Kelly are expected to get underway next week. This after the defense attorneys rested their cases on Friday. The R&B singer is charged with child pornography, obstruction of justice, and the enticement of minors into criminal sexual activity. Kelly's co-defendant and former business manager, Daryl McDavid, took the stand 3 days this week. McDavid is being questioned about his involvement in lawsuits made by women accusing Kelly of sexual assault, as well as his work to recover tapes that allegedly showed Kelly having illicit sexual contact with minors. McDavid is the only defendant in the case to have testified. Kelly and the third co-defendant, Milton Brown, did not take the witness stand. Our WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson is covering this trial. You can catch up on his reporting on our website at WTTW.com/news. And we're back with more Chicago Tonight Black Voices right after this. The children's section at your local library is probably overflowing with books about figures in Black history and illustrations of the Black experience in America. And while those important depictions are important for children to see and to learn from, they aren't always, well, fun. That's why the author of this week's Black Voices Book Club selection set out to write a book that is a lot of fun. In Stella Keeps the Sun Up, an Afro-puffed girl named Stella and her stuffed hippo friend Roger, they try their best to make the sunshine last all day and all night. Joining us now is the book's author, Clotilde Ewing. Clotilde, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Brandis.
So without spoilers, tell us, why is Stella trying to keep the sun up?
So Stella is like a lot of children, or at least like my own children. I have a 6 and 8-year-old myself who doesn't want to go to bed at night. She has these visions of what happens when she and her friends go to bed and feels like she wants to stay up all night and get in on the fun. So she tries to stay up all night long.
And doesn't every parent know about the bedtime struggles?
They're real. They are real.
So real. The struggle is so real. Why do you believe children's books like this, where the main character is Black, but the story is just a kid's story? It's not necessarily about being Black. Why is that important?
You know, I think it's really important. And I love how when you set up the segment, you talked about how books that talk about our history are really important as well. But as a mother to 2 children, 6 and 8, 2 Black children, I struggled to find books that featured Black characters, but that were about joy, that were about imagination, that were about fun. I think it's really important that our children have a real sense of our history, but I also think it's important that they see their image reflected in joyous stories as well. I think it's important for children that look like mine. I think it's also important for children that don't look like mine to see a character that they can relate to, that they'd want to hang out with, that schemes in the same ways that they do.
And you were sort of inspired by an article of sort of a similar topic. Tell me about that briefly.
Yes. So I came across an article one Sunday back in March 2018, and the print version of the article was called "She Wants More Than MLK at Bedtime." And I read the article from beginning to end. It was written by my now editor, actually, Deneen Milner. And it really gave voice to what I had experienced when I looked to build my own children's libraries. I found a lot of books out there that were about our history, that were about excellence, but there weren't as many books as I hoped to find about Black kids just having fun. And it was really important for me to build a library that reflected the community that my kids lived in and their family as well. And so when I read that article, something just awoke in me. I cut the article out, I put it on my vision board, and soon I decided to try and do something about it.
And here we are. So the
story,
here we are. The story is told in first person, and you made that choice very intentionally. Tell me why.
I did. I think that kids have a lot of agency. They have a lot to say. They have voices. They have personalities. And I wanted to put it in their own voice because I felt like Stella had a plan. She wanted to stay up all night, let her tell her story versus a narrator tell the story for her. With my own children, I try and get them to own their voice and their agency. I think that that's somewhat helped by the fact that they go to a great Montessori school and they support that there as well. But I felt it was important to try and have Stella tell her own story versus me or another adult tell it for her.
As you've mentioned, Stella is based on some kids you know really well. Tell us about that.
They are based on, and I definitely need to say this for the record, they are based on my two children, my 8-year-old daughter named Stella and my 6-year-old son named Jackson. At the time when I started this journey, they were 4 and 2. But as you had said earlier, the bedtime struggle is real in most homes, and it's real in our home as well. And so when I set on the journey of thinking about trying to write a book and going through different iterations and topics and tried to land on something that felt authentic, the bedtime struggle really did feel authentic because it's something we still are challenged with from time to time.
Till they go to college. So you say that
right.
You say the illustrator Lynn Gaines had a lot of creative license when creating the illustrations of Stella. What was it like to be able to work with her, but then also when you saw your book come to life in what she drew?
It was a pinch me moment. It really was. So Lynn Gaines did a masterful job with illustrations for Stella Keeps the Sun Up, and she'll actually be the illustrator for the rest of the series, which is really exciting. In my mind, I had a vision of what Stella would look like, but I didn't know for sure. And then once I saw that picture, I thought, wow, I almost cried. And I'm not a crier, but I almost cried when I saw it. The fact that she had those beautiful Afro puffs and the tutu and the athletic socks and the ballet slippers, it was just so perfect because why does Stella need to choose? If she wants to wear, basketball socks and a tutu, then do it. Go for it. So I think she did a wonderful job. And, this is a beautiful Black girl who just exudes joy.
You be you, Stella. So you mentioned the rest of the series. What is next for Stella?
Right. So I have a second book. That one's called Stella and the Mystery of the Missing Tooth. That one will be out in March 2023. And then hopefully a book a year after that. So far, I've signed on for 4 books that are all part of the Stella series. And soon I will be working on a Jackson series because he deserves his name in the bright lights as well. But no news on that front yet.
All right, that's exciting. We look forward to reading all of those when the time comes. And we should mention, this is not your day job. You have one as a vice president of the Chicago Community Trust. So congrats, and thanks for joining us, Clotilde Ewing.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Again, the book is called Stella Keeps the Sun Up. And up next, we immerse ourselves in purple rain.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
The Prince Estate is painting Chicago purple. The late singer's estate is partnering with brand entertainment company Superfly to bring the Prince immersive experience to downtown Chicago. With original instruments, props, and other memorabilia, Superfly COO Richard Gay says they worked hard to make sure the experience gave new insight into the Minnesota native's life and legacy.
This is an introduction to Prince and all of the things that Prince is. And there's a part of the experience, not to get too specific, where all of his official albums are on a wall, right? But it's on a wall, then it turns a corner. And there's another wall, and it turns a corner, and there's another wall because of how prolific he was at it. And you find everyone knew their era, and they were like, wait, he did this much music after 2000? And then newer people were like, oh, wait, he did this much music before 2000? And it was so great just to see people discover things. And the great thing about the experience is we tried to do justice to all the different parts of Prince. So it's not just a discography, here's all the music he had, but there's also some costumes and some of his gear that he wore. And so he was a fashion icon. There's a studio where people could play with the stems from Let's Go Crazy. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can get to play producer for a day. And so there were all these different parts of Prince because he was such a multi-talented genius, right? So many different dimensions to his genius that when you explore all of them, everyone, no matter how big a fan they were, or they were just new and came because they heard it was a cool experience, everyone got to discover something. Come and experience it. Come and step on the set. Come and sit on the bike. Come and actually listen to the music at the listening stations. Come and actually see Prince in his own words in the video, talk about artist rights and explore that journey and hear him tell his own story about, hey, here's why I changed my name to a symbol and here's what this is about. And so what we really hope people take away is literally just all the different dimensions of Prince.
And the Prince Immersive Experience is downtown on North Michigan Avenue until October 9th. The future of flight. That's how a Chicagoland nonprofit describes its program and passion for aviation. Arts correspondent Angel Ito jets over to West Chicago for flight lessons with Tuskegee Next and shares how they're helping Black and brown students soar.
Tuskegee Next was born out of a passion for aviation.
Since 2015, Tuskegee Next has worked with students ages 18 through 20 to help them explore career paths within aviation. The program was also born out of a need. There's a mandatory retirement for pilots at age 65, in addition to there being such a high cost to even obtain a license.
When we began our program, we were blessed by the presence of 6 original Tuskegee Airmen who helped us dub this organization as the next generation of Tuskegee Airmen. That's how we got our name.
The Tuskegee Airmen were the first Black aviators in the U.S. Armed Forces. Founded in 1941, the squadron faced racism and segregation, limiting their opportunities for advancement.
We asked them questions about how we should operate as an organization in order to honor their legacy.
And while it takes the average person interested in aviation 9 to 12 months to earn their pilot license, Tuskegee Next ensures their cadets get it done in 8 weeks with a $30,000 investment in each student. It also covers housing, food, and other educational components during their on-campus stay.
Training Monday through Friday for at least 8 hours. After the training, they have 1 to 2 hours of study hall, depending on the day. They have resume writing workshops, corporate visits throughout the summer, community events that they give back to, like our aviation days, where they actually run STEM-oriented stations to teach younger students about aviation and aerospace. To see them gain confidence in themselves, gain confidence as pilots, to grow, it's exciting for me. And Marcellus is a great example of that. His story is full circle since he was one of our cadets from our very first class.
I witnessed some of those hours Marcellus Freeman put in firsthand, 3,000 feet in the air. With a father in aviation, it's a dream Freeman's had since he was 6. Now at 25, he's already flying corporate jets.
Tuskegee's work is so important because it provides access to people who otherwise wouldn't even know this is a possibility. They realize there are more opportunities than just going and being a fry cook for McDonald's or going off and maybe being a chef. Sure, that's a great job, maybe being a chef for a 5-star restaurant, but how would you like to get paid to go fly? When I fly for a living, I've only met 3 or 4 Black pilots. I can count on probably both hands the amount of Black pilots I've met that are in my position I am now. The ones that are my age, probably even fewer.
When he isn't serving as second in command in the air, Freeman is mentoring cadets with Tuskegee Next, a position he doesn't take for granted.
Being able to relate to those cadets and go, hey, I've been through what you've been through, but to provide them with an image of where they can be. So now you're a cadet. In the next 5 years, you can be teaching the next class like I'm teaching you. That's my goal.
For Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Angel Ito.
And Tuskegee Next is currently accepting applications for their next round of cadets. That application closes December 31st. And that's our show for this weekend. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News. While you're there, make sure to check out our Fall Festival Guide. And if you're watching us on Saturday night, know that you can also catch Black Voices and Latino Voices on Sundays beginning at 10 p.m. We leave you tonight with some more of Angel Ito's Flight Lesson with Tuskegee Next. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.